Oh, there.
Welcome to the March edition of the Anne Arundel Community Lecture Series. We're really happy to have a local expert on barn owls with us tonight. Andy Brown is a Maryland native and attended Frostburg State University. He has been a naturalist with Calvert County Natural Resources Division since 1986. Amazing how time flies. Andy received his bird banding license at age 16 and has worked on many bird research projects over the years. He began a barn owl nest box program in Calvert County in 1994 and is a Farmland Raptor committee member for Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. And that, I'm real excited to have Andy working with this Farmland Raptor program that we're hoping to do, essentially take the model that he has built and perfected over the years in Calvert County and help make that a statewide effort. So I'm really happy to be working with Andy on this. So tonight, um, well, I'm sure you have the title of your slide, your talk on the first slide, but I think we're going to learn a good bit about barn owls tonight. So Andy, I will turn it over to you at this point. And just to let people know, we are recording this meeting. Make sure that you are on mute during the presentation, and then we should have time for questions and answers at the end of the talk. Andy, take it away.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, how's that looking?
All good.
All good. Very good. Okie doke. So, as Chris mentioned, I'm have been working with barn owls in the Patuxent River since 1994, and we've seen a lot of change in that time frame over the years, and so I've got some interesting information that I would like to share with you about what we have found and where we might be going. So the title of my presentation is the barn owls of the Patuxent River, 6 square feet of prime waterfront property, and that 6 square feet relates to the nest box, the style of nest box that we've are now using for many of our birds. We've got, as you'll see, we've got probably close to 70 nest boxes up now in the Patuxent River Valley. So. Then they've got a footprint of 2 feet by 2 feet wide by 3 feet long. So it's there's your 6 square feet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the barn owl evolution and taxonomy, their ecology, the history of conservation efforts, and the current and future efforts of where we're going, the Patuxent River Project and the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership Farmland Raptor Program. So, for a small number of folks, this is kind of the glimpse that we get of barn owls, this ghostly, blurry, ghostly figure in the tops of dark barns, the rafters, dark rafters of barns in abandoned buildings. And it's you can see certainly why they have conjured up, ideas of ghosts and such in the past. It was kind of interesting, a little story about in Israel that they have the highest density of nesting barn owls in the world in Israel, which is kind of interesting. But the only places where there are trees are in their cemeteries, in their graveyards. So those are really the traditional nesting sites for barn owls, in these old large trees in cemeteries. And if you happen to go into a cemetery at night and you encounter a barn owl, it's very, very easy to conjure up the idea of a ghost. So it's a neat little story. So barn owls have had a very long history with humans, hence their name. They live in abandoned buildings and barns and such. but I believe it was the Germans who were the first to erect nesting structures. And this is a shot of a roof nesting structure in Germany. I think I'm going to redesign our nest boxes, Chris, and make sure that all of our entrance holes are heart-shaped in the future.
I think
So-
that adds a nice touch.
I think it does. Yep, very good. So, but if you take a look at these guys up close, I mean, you quickly notice the intricate feather markings. Look at those little white diamonds on the tips of all of their feathers. The color of the blue gray and the buff color and the cinnamon mixed with the white. I think is got to be one of the most beautiful birds, at least in North America, that we have. I have this long-standing argument with a naturalist colleague of mine who swears that snowies are prettier, but I definitively disagree. So we were long taught that barn owls were the only member of their family, and actually that might be the case in North America, but that's actually not true. There are two groups of owls, two families of owls, the Titonidae and the Strigidae. And the Strigidae are our true owls. The true owls have 189 species worldwide with over 500 taxa or subspecies. The Titonidae are actually broken into two genera. The typical Titos, and then this Phylogenetic, which are the Oriental bay owls. There are actually two species of Oriental bay owls. Within the group of the Tito, there are four major groups. There's the grass owls, the barn owls, the masked owl, and the sooty owl group. So clearly, barn owls are not the only member of their family. There's 16 species worldwide, and 32, roughly 32 taxa. So that's kind of that's a little bit more than what we originally thought. So if you look at the phylogenetic tree and how these guys separated and evolved over time, the Tito separated from the true owls back about 45 million years ago. Then at about 30 million, the bay owls broke off, and then 25 million they started to separate into the four groups that I was mentioning earlier. So it gives you an idea of kind of their history. So barn owls are cosmopolitan. They're found on every continent on the globe. There are 25 animals that share this distinguished designation, one being humans. So there are not too many that are really found all around the world. A couple of notable birds species that are cosmopolitan, in addition to barn owls, are peregrine falcons, osprey, and cattle egrets. So it's kind of neat. So this map kind of shows where the distribution or how the barn owl evolved. It's thought that they originated in Southeast Asia, and then just dispersed along these pathways that you see here. In the owl scientific community, it is thought that there are 5 different species of barn owl. So, if you start on the left here in the North America, Central America, and South America, they believe that this is the American barn owl, the Tyto furcata. Now, the American Ornithological Union, AOU, does not recognize Tyto furcata. They still are calling the bird that lives in the U.S. Tyto alba, the common barn owl. So there's some work being done right now to try to sort these sort of things out. The Tyto glaucops that you see there is the ashy-faced owl, and it's found only on Hispaniola, very, very isolated population. Then in the central map there, Tyto alba, the common barn owl, is distributed in Europe and in Africa. there's another species that's found just on the island of Sao Tome off the west coast of Africa, called the Sao Tome barn owl, and he has been separated from common barn owl officially. And then the western barn owl is Tyto javanica. So that's kind of what the belief is among the owl researchers throughout the world. We just need to catch up here in North America. So even though the barn owls are probably some of the most frequently studied in the owl group, you can see that the majority of the work is done in Europe. North America has only accounts for about 16% of the research that's been done on barn owls worldwide. So there's a lot of information that we still don't know about our North American birds. About 80% of those studies that are listed here are diet-based or diet-related. So there's actually quite little known about their ecology, and so that's a wide open slate for us to discover. It's kind of exciting, actually. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and run through a couple of differences between barn owls and the group of true owls. Let's start with the shape of their skull. They have a very large, elongated skull compared to the true owls. Their eyes are small compared to the other birds. They have short tails and very long legs. We'll talk a little bit about the skull shape further in the presentation, where you can see it pretty distinctly. But that skull shape gives them the heart-shaped face that differs from the true owls. They have something called a pectinate talon, and it's something very similar to the nightjars and the herons, where the inner toe has a serrated flange on the side of the talon that they use for grooming themselves. It's thought and believed that light-colored birds tend to be infested more with feather lice than darker birds are, and so that this pectinate talon, this little comb, helps them groom the lice out of their feathers, which is kind of a neat thing. It's shared by the egrets, the white egrets as well. Their syrinx, or their vocal cords, are shaped a little bit differently than the true owls, and as a result, they don't hoot. They have a whole multitude of sounds. None of them sound like an owl that we're accustomed to. Adults will scream, they'll rattle, they'll chitter. They have a couple of different vocalizations associated with copulation and courtship. The chicks also have a number of different vocalizations that are different from each other. When they're frightened, or when they're in a defense mode, when they're hungry, when they're cold and they want to be brooded, and then vocalizations that they use to negotiate with each other, and we'll get in a little bit more detail on that later as well. So I think most folks are familiar with the scream call. That's what I have embedded here, and let's see if we can get that to work. Oh, no, it won't. Darn. Huh, isn't that strange? There it goes. There we go. Yeah, neat. So, I don't believe, most people, I think people see barn owls before they hear barn owls. And if you're out in the grassland areas at night, you could potentially hear them. It's not common to hear that. It's not extremely loud, and unless you really know what you're looking for or listening for, it's easily missed. So, as I alluded to just a few minutes ago, barn owls are birds of open grassland, and most of our true owls dwell in the forest, or forest-dwelling creatures. So pasture land, fallow fields, meadows, even agricultural edge are important habitat for barn owls. They don't do well in fields of row crops with corn and soybean, mainly because it doesn't support their food sources. So they employ a wide range or a couple of different types of hunting techniques. Barn owls are strictly nocturnal. So if you see this, there's something wrong here. There's something abnormal. And I think if you look closely, you might even see some jesses on that bird. So it might be a falconer's bird that's out flying during the day, which is risky in its own way. So, a starving bird will come out and hunt during the day. So that's problematic. Or a bird who has been flushed from its roost, you might see flying across the field looking for a new place to hide. But they are pretty much strictly nocturnal hunters. During the winter months, they do like what many other raptors will do, where they will sit on a perch and scan their feeding area, and then they'll fly down and capture prey. But during the breeding season, the foraging demands are just so intense that they have to do something a little bit different, called coursing. So they'll fly low over the grassland, back and forth, in one direction, and then turn around and go the opposite direction, perpendicular to what they just flown, called quartering, and fly back and forth over the area as well, looking for food. So I mentioned, the foraging demands, and we probably have all heard the stories about, well, barn owls will consume between 3,000 and 4,000 rodents in a nesting season. That's pretty common information out there. But what does that really mean? Each chick in the nest needs about 3 or 4 voles per day in order to meet its energy demands. That's a lot of voles. When you've got a nest full of 5 chicks and they need 3 or 4 a day, you got to provide at least 20 to them each night. And so that's a pretty high demand, especially if you're hunting in marginal habitat. So females throughout the course of the breeding season will lose about 1/4 of their weight, 25% of weight loss. And males will lose about 10%. Well, why is such a difference? Well, females obviously are producing eggs and a greater energy cost than the males have. So that's probably the main difference there. Females are bigger, so therefore they're not as efficient as hunting as the males are. Males can catch a lot more prey because they are smaller and more maneuverable. Excuse me. So they will provide food items to the nest. Usually if the hunting is good, they'll usually provide all of the voles that are necessary for that given day within the first 1 or 2 hours of the night. However, they'll continue to hunt and continue to bring food items to the nest site and cache them in there with the chicks. They have found that the males in particular will not eat until the end of the night, because if they fill their bellies, that weighs them down, and they have a little bit less efficiency in hunting. So they will hunt and hunt and hunt on an empty belly, and then at the end of the night, then they will actually feed themselves. I'm not 100% sure that this happens all the time. There's a lot of variables that will influence that. I have found that when adults are bringing food items back to the nest, back to the chicks, that many, probably 80%, are missing their heads. Okay, they're headless. Now we know that brain material is the most nutritious of body part of the vole or the mouse. It's high in protein and fat, and so they'll remove the head and eat it and bring the rest to the chicks. It's not nearly enough for a full day's food ration, but it gives them that little boost of energy. It's a small amount, small tidbit. The highest bang for the buck, I guess, kind of would be something like a 5-hour energy drink. Give them a vole head, and they can get back out there and hunt some more. So that's kind of fascinating, I think. So the chicks in their feeding, I'll talk about this because it's all related in this one particular topic, is that they only eat about 50% of their daily allowance in the first few hours of the night. They go through spells where they will eat and they'll interact with each other, and then they take a nap, and then they wake up and they eat and they take a nap, and they nap and eat throughout the night, and even throughout the following day. They've done some really interesting nest cams showing that the chicks are not sleeping all day long. They're up and active as much as they are at night, and will feed and interact with each other. So it's kind of fascinating information. But usually by the next night, they have consumed all of the food that's in their nest box. So ready to do it all again. So why are barn owls such efficient, masterful hunters? And there's a number of different reasons. You've all heard about the asymmetry of the ear openings that owls have, that they use for locating prey and judging distance, because the sound is entering at two different locations. It's a type of triangulation, and they can measure distance quite effectively. They've done studies with barn owls where they've put blinders on the bird to where they cannot see, and still over 90% of the time can locate and capture their prey just by sound alone. So there's some reasons for this, and the asymmetrical ear openings are one of those. There are two types of ear asymmetry. Some are the actual opening in the skull, where the ear openings are higher on one side and lower on the other in the skull. The other is in the skin, in the flesh, so that the ear openings in the skull are the same, but on the skin they're asymmetrical. Barn owls have asymmetric ear openings in their skull. Okay, so just to clarify that. The feathers play an incredible role in their hearing ability. The feather on the left there is on the front of the facial disc. You can see it's loose, it's broad. The barbs are not touching each other. They're spread out, and these feathers are said to be auditorily transparent. They allow the sound to pass through. The feathers on the back of the facial disc, behind the ear, are those that are on the right there, and they're very dense, very thick. The barbs are attached and close together, and they are said to be auditorily opaque. So sound will pass through the front feathers on the facial disc, bounce off of the feathers behind the ear, and funnel into the ear canal. This gives them a tremendous hearing ability. In addition, they have more hairs and longer cochlea than any other night hunting birds. So they clearly have the best hearing ability of all of our nocturnal avian predators. So they're essentially a flying satellite dish. There's nothing but a big facial disc that they fly around and listen with. This facial disc enhances sound by 20 decibels, and they can hear sounds that are 10 times more faint than what humans can hear. So as they're flying around, you'll see them, just like if you happen to watch a short-eared owl, does the same, a very similar thing, has evolved the same way. They'll be flying back and forth and hear something, and then bank real quick and turn their bodies and to get a second listen. So you can observe them using their hearing abilities to hunt. So once they've located their prey, they plunge into that deep grass with those long, skinny legs, and are pretty effective at capturing the rodents. Now, I mentioned long, skinny legs because a number of different owls do plunge hunt like this, where they listen for their prey, and sight unseen plunge into where the prey is to grab it and capture it. Most of them we're familiar with are like great gray owl, northern hawk owl, boreal owl, those fellows who are up in up in the far northern reaches of the continent, and they have the ability to actually capture prey as much as 2-3 feet deep in the snow by plunging through the snow and breaking through the ice crust. But barn owls' legs are too thin for that kind of behavior, so they can't plunge hunt through snow or through ice crust. They're made specifically for grass, for plunging into grass, and so that kind of limits where they can live and how tolerant they are of winter conditions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on when we discuss mortality. So what are they eating? As I mentioned before, they're pretty much rodent specialists throughout all of North America and throughout the world, actually. This little fella is a vole, VOLE. We have 2 species of vole found in southern Maryland. They're aptly named meadow vole and woodland vole. So barn owls are eating meadow voles. And why? If given the opportunity, a barn owl is going to eat almost entirely meadow voles. It is a preferred prey item. And why is that? Voles have a number of characteristics that make them desirable. They dwell on the surface of the ground, on the top of the ground. They're not burrowers. Look at those little tiny front legs. They can't dig very well. Now, that's not to say they won't go in a tunnel of a mole. But especially the woodland voles do. But they run around on the surface of the ground in the grassland, and you can actually find meadow vole trails in many pastures that are just like deer trails. they're worn down to bare dirt, and they follow the same paths often throughout their lives. Most of the time, they're covered over by tall grass, and that's how the owls have to catch them, by plunging through the grass to get them. Another reason is that, from what I've understood, I don't know this from firsthand knowledge, but I've been told that voles are quite noisy compared to mice and other rodents. They chitter a lot. They talk between each other, and they're quite noisy. So that's one of the reasons why that good hearing ability allows the owls to capture the voles. And compared to mice and other rodents, they are slow. They're not really quick. So all of those things add up to a preferred prey item. They don't have to exert too much energy to capture them. So that's why they're popular. Just about every predator that I know of eats voles. So even mammalian predators. So they might even be actually pretty tasty. I don't know. We'll see. I've never tested the theory myself, but it goes back to the old Farley Mowat movie, Never Cry Wolf, where he's eating all those lemmings in his tent. So. This is a fascinating study that was recently conducted, and you might have seen it published in some of our local bird magazines, maybe even National Geographic, Audubon definitely. That a study was done about the white coloration of barn owls. So there are 2 white nocturnal hunting owls. Barn owl is one, and snowy is the other. And snowy, we know, is white because it needs to blend in or camouflage with its Arctic environment. But barn owls, we know, can't live up there, and so their white coloration has nothing to do with camouflage or cryptic coloring. So why in the world are they white? Well, this study kind of gives a little bit of insight into one possibility. If you think about a prey item, a rabbit or a mouse or something of that sort, some of their behaviors are, when they first detect a threat, their initial behavior is to freeze. Okay, and then when that threat gets close enough, then they'll take flight and exit. So this study measured the freeze, the length of the freeze behavior of voles when presented with a white bird versus a dark bird. So they had taxidermied owl, barn owl, that was very white in color. And in Europe, there's they have polymorphism. They have a different color morph that's a dark reddish color, reddish brown color. And they tested this theory by running this taxidermy owl on a zip line down towards the voles, and they did it with the white bird and then again with the red bird, and they found that the voles' fright or freeze response was twice as long as it was with the white bird as it was with the red bird. So these voles froze in place 2 times longer and were added to their ease of capture for the white birds. Now this is done with nights of bright light, of full moon nights. Well, then you think to yourself, well, why haven't they evolved to be all white if it's such good technique? Well, not every night is bright. There are some dark nights out there, and then that could be a disadvantage for them. They have found that the dark colored birds are more efficient hunters on nights that are dark and don't have bright moon. They also found that on the bright nights that the dark birds will hunt areas where there are shadows instead of out in the open. So it's a kind of a two-pronged strategy that they use to maximize hunting efficiency. On the bright nights, the white bird gets more. On the dark nights, the dark bird gets more. So it's kind of pretty fascinating study. So let's look at as I mentioned before, nearly 80% of the studies on barn owls have been about diet, been diet related in North America. So we've got a really good handle on what they're eating. We know that. And we know that, where there is an abundance of voles, they're eating as many voles as they possibly can. So in the upper left corner, Microtus is the family of voles. You can see, pretty much our barn owls are eating voles, widespread throughout North America. But if you jump over to the right there, the next box is Sigmodon. Sigmodon are the rats, and here in our area, that is mostly the marsh rice rat, but it also includes in the south hispid cotton rat and black rat and so forth. But you can see a little dot right around the Chesapeake Bay there that's a little bit darker blue, and that's kind of in the 40% range. And you'll see in a minute that kind of lines up with what we have found in the Patuxent River. The middle section, Peromyscus, is the white-footed mice. Those are the pesky little things that get in your house during the winter. But strangely enough, it also has a little bit of darker area around Chesapeake Bay. We have not found any, very little evidence of Peromyscus in any of our diet analysis work. Then the one next to it, Mus, is house mouse, virtually none. And then the bottom, the Retrodontomes, is a harvest mice, and we just really don't have harvest mice. Their list is, I think, endangered species in Maryland. So this is what we have found in our box analysis. We've sifted through all of the pellet material at the end of the nesting season to get an idea of what kind of prey items they're eating. We have found on average in the Patuxent River that they eat about 40% of the voles, meadow voles, another 40% of the marsh rice rat, close to 20% of birds. And these are made up mostly of red-winged blackbirds, cowbirds, and starlings, and then the last little spattering of shrews. And so this obviously can vary from year to year depending on abundance of prey, and it actually even varies a little bit from nest site to nest site depending on where the nest is located in terms of agriculture versus marshland. Some of the fun things that we have found in the boxes have been, snake and baby muskrat and the young rabbits. We've found evidence of young cottontails. Some other bird species, cardinals and sora rails, Virginia rails, least bittern. All kind of fun prey items. some of the early telemetry studies done in England have mapped out some basic home range estimates. This is something we have nothing on here in North America. So what they found in the UK is that during the breeding season, they occupy about a 400-acre range during the breeding season, and then in winter it expands up to as much as 12 to 1,500 acres. So it's a pretty big area. One study on sooty owls found that that one pair actually hunted in the winter over 8,000-acre territory. I mean, that's nearly twice the size of Annapolis. So that's pretty remarkable. One of the things that we want to try to look at is, identify these foraging areas, where they're feeding, and what type of habitat they're eating in, and how far they are from their nest sites. So there's a little bit of data out there from Europe and a little bit from the U.S. In Germany and Scotland, they found that birds are hunting as far as maybe 2 to 3 miles from their nest site, which is a lot further than what we originally thought. In the U.S., the one longest record that has been found is 4.5 miles. The farthest is in Switzerland, where an individual hunted his foraging area more than 30 miles from its nest site. So that's pretty crazy. That's essentially the length of the entire length of Calvert County. So pretty amazing stuff. It'd be nice to find out what our birds are doing. We'd like to know that. Historical nest sites along the Patuxent River have been in duck blinds, nearshore and offshore duck blinds. It's kind of neat that we've often found barn owls nesting inside the blind and osprey nesting on top. So they seem to have worked out a unique partnership there where they don't compete. They certainly don't compete for the same food and tolerate each other for nesting. A number of areas along the Patuxent River have exposed cliffs, and we found that there's over the years there have been barn owls nesting in cavities in those cliffs, but probably started out as kingfisher burrows and were able to be excavated out to larger openings. So let's talk a little bit about some of the historic efforts of conservation for barn owls. In 1986, National Audubon designated them on the blue list. Then in 1988, Glenn Thayers and Scott Smith with Maryland DNR started a marsh nest box program in Dorchester County. They published a paper that was titled "Barn Owls Are Marsh Birds Too." It was kind of neat, neat little paper. And they had great success over there on the Eastern Shore. Then in 1989, Prince George's County started with their nest box project. Kerry Fitzpatrick and Greg Kearns put up a number of boxes in southern Prince George's County, especially along the Patuxent River. In 1991, Maryland designated barn owl on the watch list. 94, we started our project in Calvert. In 1999, many of you know Melissa Boyle. Melissa started a barn owl project in St. Mary's County as part of her senior project at St. Mary's College. And then most recently, the Maryland State Wildlife Action Plan had designated the barn owl as a species of greatest conservation need. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into current efforts. So here's a nice shot of Scott's boxes over on the Eastern Shore in the marsh out there. Now the marshland is saltier over on the shore, and so it's dominated by salt meadow hay, which is a low-growing marsh plant. I tried to duplicate this on the Patuxent River with no success at all. Put the boxes out in the marsh, and come summertime, the big cord grass and the cattails grew up taller than the box, and the birds couldn't find them, or if they did find them, they didn't like them. So I've had no success with marsh nest boxes on the Patuxent. Now, if I got them up higher and above the grass, that may be a completely different story. But we're talking 12, 15 feet. These grasses can get really tall. So that's a challenge all on its own. I'm going to experiment with some shoreline boxes, a few more shoreline boxes that overlook the marsh, and see what kind of success rate we have there. We have found that nest boxes mounted on power poles or used power poles right at the river edge that overlook the marsh seem to be pretty attractive to the birds. Even if it's not wide open, it's on the, even a couple of them have forest land right up behind them. Maybe it mimics a natural cavity in a tree that they would have used traditionally and hunted the marsh. But they seem to be pretty attractive. So we'll gather some more data on that one. So if you look at the nesting results from the late 80s until about 2006 along the Patuxent River, this is what we find. Prince George's County obviously leading the group with 25 nest boxes and fledged between 200 and 250 young during that time frame. Four of Melissa's boxes were along the river, and they produced no nesting. And Arundel County had a couple of boxes up there in and around Jug Bay that we really don't have a handle. I've tried to talk with Danny Bystrach about it, and there's some rough estimates, but they weren't really ever tracked. So we really don't have a known number there. In Calvert County, we had 19 boxes and produced 26 nestlings throughout that time period. So it's not a lot. Why I stopped at 2006? In 1996, we had our biggest year ever. I think in Calvert, we had 4 active nests simultaneously. Prince George's County had, what did he say? He had at least a dozen, I think Greg was telling me. That was our biggest nesting season on record. But then in the winter of 1997, we had severe cold and heavy snow that lasted for days, if not weeks, and it really put a number on the barn owls in the Patuxent. Their numbers essentially crashed, and they really haven't even recovered to what they were in pre-1997. So, excuse me. If you look at the Breeding Bird Atlas data, the BBA1 in 1987, the BBA2 in 2006, it shows a 50%, 57% decline in barn owl nesting in Maryland between the two surveys. Now, it's not necessarily may not be 100% accurate, because that first Breeding Bird Atlas, there were folks who were targeting barn owls, and they spent a great deal of effort combing the state trying to find out where these birds actually were, and that effort was not duplicated in the BBA2. But what's important about this is that you see in the lower right hand map that the owls seem to be distributed into 3 main areas statewide. Now, this is based on limited data, and it's something that we need to confirm and find out if it's actually the case. But those areas are Upper Montgomery County, Frederick and Washington counties, the Patuxent River Valley there, and then the Eastern Shore. The Delmarva is very strong, has a very strong population. So we need to confirm some of these. Why is the Patuxent River an important place for them? Well, you've got farmland up and down the Patuxent River that is very old, very historic farms. Several of them still in the same families that were land granted to them by Lord Baltimore in the 1600s. So it's traditionally good habitat, has been for hundreds of years. And so that's probably, and hasn't changed much. We haven't seen a great deal of pressure, developmental pressure, that other places of the state has seen. And that includes Prince George's County, southern Prince George's County. You don't think about PG County looking like this, but there are places that still do. So what do we use for criteria for selecting a place to put a box up? Is there the presence of roosting birds? Obviously, if there's birds in a barn, it's a prime candidate for a nest box. And so that's priority number one. Has it been a historical nesting site in the past? Some information from Ian Taylor and the Barn Owl Trust in the UK says that the birds tend to recolonize areas that have been used in the past. So that's an important piece of information. Is it proximity to historical nesting sites, and then lastly, suitable habitat. We know that with the work done in Europe that they don't necessarily, the nest doesn't necessarily need to be directly in the prime habitat. It could be in an area that's adjacent to it, or not far from, or a little bit further from it. So this is all information that we want to confirm and learn about the American birds. So in 2012, we kind of had a resurrection of the Barn Owl Project, mainly due to enthusiastic volunteer, and she started, got out there and checked our boxes that were still left. Most of them had fallen down. There was no evidence of nesting since we last checked in 2006. So we put up new boxes. Now we have over 60 nest boxes installed, and we have a crew of 30 volunteers who get out and monitor those boxes and report the data. They help us build them, they help us install them, and help us monitor them. So from 2012, this is what we kind of the results that we've had. Prince George's is down to 6 nest boxes, but still has produced about roughly 150 nestlings out of those 6 boxes. And Arundel County still with their actually has a couple more new boxes, and we're now up to something like 6 now, I believe, in Anne Arundel County. And since 2019, we've banded 12 chicks out of those nest boxes. Calvert 57, and 65 nestlings all have been banded. And in St. Mary's still that's new on our target list, as you'll see here in a few minutes. So barn owls do exhibit sexual dimorphism. The females are 20% larger than the males, but they also have a little bit different coloration. Obviously, you can see in this slide, the female on the left is more buffy colored on her neck and chest. She has a lot more spots, and the spots are larger. The feathers behind her ruff on her head are much darker in color than on the male. They're kind of this dark buff color. She has a dusky edges on her bill, whereas the male's bill is a solid pink color. During the winter months, the non-breeding season, they're pretty solitary. They don't like each other. They take a nice long vacation from each other each year. And where they roost is here again is another mystery, something that we would like to find data on. Are they roosting in buildings more so than in cedar trees? Are they roosting in close proximity to their future nest sites or past nest sites? How far do they travel? Do they have seasonal movements, and how far do they travel during the winter months? This is all information that we hope to gather. So when the breeding season begins, they join up again. They will court and create a new pair bond. There's some interesting data on monogamy and divorce among barn owls in Europe, that they tend to have a higher divorce rate, up to 25% in their younger years. But as they get a little bit older, then they find a mate that's kind of compatible for them, and they tend to renew those pair bonds with that mate for longer periods of time. And interestingly enough, they have found that those older birds with who practice a little more monogamy have produce more young, have a higher production of young. So they will occupy the cavity together. They do they preen each other, allopreening, and they copulate inside the cavity. The male will then begin to bring food items. He brings her dinner. Oftentimes, what he does, he brings a food, and then after presenting the food, they copulate. So he's a gentleman. He pays for dinner first all the time. So, but you'll notice that pellets are deposited in the nest cavity. You start to see pellets and prey items, and she'll start to molt some of her flight feathers. Egg laying begins, incubation begins on the first day, the first egg that's laid. The eggs are laid between 3 and 4 days apart. And an average clutch size is between 5 and 7 here in our area. Female is the sole incubator. She will then pretty much be Peter Piper's wife. She's pretty much holed up in that nest cavity, and he brings the male brings the food to her, and she's on those eggs pretty much 24/7. That's when she does most of her flight feather molt while she's in the nest. After 34 days, the first egg hatches. There's like all altricial birds, their eyes are closed and they're virtually naked. There's a little saying that says, "Only a face a mother can love," and I think that applies to this little guy. He's not a very attractive chick in my book. So they hatch asynchronously. Every 3 or 4 days, the next one will hatch out. She will brood them for about 2 weeks after hatching, because they can't regulate their body temperature. So she's in this cavity she's in there for a week or 2 or maybe 2 prior to egg laying for another 5 weeks incubating, and then another 2 weeks afterwards brooding her chicks. And that's a long time to be holed up in that little cavity. And they just don't get too attractive. That's pretty hideous looking there, I think, in my opinion. It looks like something out of a 1950s science fiction movie. These chicks are the oldest, the biggest one there. He's probably about 3 weeks old, and you can see the age variation of the others in the box. Look at the one on the left, though. You can clearly see that elongated skull, and that bird looks very much like a vulture, doesn't it? I think is very similar to a turkey vulture appearance. But after 4 weeks, they become the ugly duckling. They're the cutie. They turn into little cuties and start to get feathers on their face. And there's not too many things, maybe a saw-whet owl, but too many other things that are more cute than this little guy. My sister always says to me, "How in the world do they keep themselves clean?" And it's pretty interesting. They're always bright white, and they keep their feathers pretty clean. So there's a lot of interesting behaviors and dynamics that are occurring inside of this nest box. The largest brood on record was 19, and it was probably the result of polygamy, where one male had two females, and both of those females nested in the same box together simultaneously. It's pretty much unheard of for one hen to lay 19 eggs. So it was most likely two females in one box. And out of that 19, 16 of those chicks fledged, which he was working his tail off. There must have been plenty of food around for him to bring 16 chicks to full fledge. So there's like I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff going on inside the nest box between the chicks. You know, it was thought that for a long time that they practiced something called a siblicide, where and it was one of the theories that, you know, like most of our large raptors do, one of the theories why they have asynchronous hatching is that if food sources dry up, the older, stronger birds will actually prey upon the younger, weaker ones, and it ensures some genetic material is passed on to the next generation instead of wiping out the whole entire clutch. I'm not so sure in that actually is the case here. That barn owls do that. Now there is brood reduction. There's no question about it. You know, we'll check a box early in the season, and there'll be 4 chicks, and then come back, you know, a month or so later to band, and then there's only 3. So there is brood reduction that does occur, but whether it's by siblicide is something that we really don't know. The use of nest cams has provided a great deal of information on the interactions of the chicks. They have found now that they actually will cooperate with each other in the box. Older chicks will oftentimes pick up a food item that's cached in the cavity and feed a younger chick. That's been documented with nest cams. So there is cannibalism does occur. So if a chick does die because of starvation, is not killed by his brothers, that they will eat it. There's no question about that. But whether they actually go out and kill their siblings is probably not as frequent as what is originally was thought. One of the other behaviors that they're doing is something called negotiation, and this is kind of cool. They have found that during, you know, while the parents are out away hunting, that the chicks talk to each other. They communicate with each other back and forth, and they communicate how hungry they are. So one will start at, "I'm really hungry." The next one will come out, "Yeah, but I'm more hungry than you." And then the third one will say, "Well, you got the last mouse, so I'm the hungriest." And it's these negotiation calls that are going on all night long inside this box. One chick will emit as many as 4,000 negotiation calls in one night. What's interesting is that they don't talk over top of each other. One will make a call, the next one will call, the third one will call. They take turns. They're polite to each other, which is kind of interesting too. What they have found is that the chick who got fed the last, he's obviously the less hungry, and they go through this negotiation, and he'll determine, you know, they'll all determine that Edward over here is the most hungry. He hasn't been fed recently. Then they'll allow him to run to the front of the box and beg the loudest and get fed, while they take a step back and wait in the background. Doesn't mean they don't beg. You know, they still do, but they allow the hungriest chick to beg the loudest and get to the nest, to the entrance of the cavity, which is pretty fascinating. Just really amazing behavior. Now, I was fortunate to record this one night. It was inadvertent. I was trying to get recordings of adult vocalizations as they brought food to the nest, but what I captured was this negotiation between the chicks. And so I took a little small snippet of it, and you can hear one chick start, and he'll call a couple of times, and then you'll hear another one start to call back, and they go back and forth a few times. You know, it's only about a 30-second clip, but this goes on for a long period of time. I had over an hour of recording while they were talking to each other. But see if you can recognize the conversation. Pretty neat. Yeah, Yeah, pretty neat stuff. And the one that calls that negotiates the loudest, and actually the duration of that call it tends to indicate the level of hunger that they have. So pretty neat stuff. So in Israel, they found something really interesting that they use pit tags on bands. They put the pit tag on the band, and then have a reader at the nest box, and they can track which individuals are coming to the nest box by using this pit tag reader. And so one night they found that, geez, we're getting a strange tag number. It's not one of the parents, not either of the parents. And so they set up a camera to watch, and what they found out was it was a fledgling from a nearby box, from a box down the road. He had already fledged, but what he was doing was coming in at night, and he was invading the nest box where the other chicks were being fed by this separate pair. It wasn't his parents. It was a separate pair, and he was stealing the food because he was older and he was more aggressive, and he was out competing the other chicks for the food. And so it's a phenomenon called kleptoparasitism. Pretty amazing. So obviously Israel has the highest density of nesting of barn owls, and so that probably occurs a lot more frequently than it does, or even if it does occur in the U.S., we don't know, but it would be interesting to find out. So we band our chicks when they're between when they're between 6 and 7 weeks old. They have reached pretty much their maximum weight, but their feather development has not fully developed. At this age, we can pretty comfortably determine the sex of the chicks, even though the bird banding lab doesn't accept sexing on chicks. We can pretty much get an accurate sex on them. They tend to lose weight from 7 weeks till fledging, which is they usually fledge between 8 and 9 weeks old. The bands we use are your typical lockover raptor bands issued by USGS, and here's a shot of us putting a band on those dirty little feet. They are dirty. So mortality, we don't really have a handle on mortality rates in the U.S. It's mostly anecdotal, and it probably varies from location to location. It's estimated that maybe as much as 80% of first-year birds die, so that survivorship is really only about 20%. We know that they're preyed upon if they're flushed out of their roost sites during the day. They're preyed upon by red-tailed hawks, and at night by great horned owls, and probably I would imagine probably a barred owl as well. Starvation is one of the main causes of mortality among the young birds. They just are not efficient hunters. They're not tolerant of cold weather, as I mentioned before. They have fewer feathers than other owls because of their high foraging demands. They don't pack on a lot of fat, so they can't tolerate cold temperatures. Anytime when they're starving, they're going to have to disperse. They're going to have to go look for food. And anytime when they travel great distances looking for food, they are under a higher risk of mortality. One of our chicks this past summer fledged from a box in the Patuxent, Middle Patuxent River, and was recovered in the inner harbor of Baltimore. Within a month, it flew from Calvert County to Baltimore Inner Harbor, where it was found on the street, on the sidewalk. It was still alive, but unfortunately had a wrist injury, and could not be repaired. So it ended up as a exhibit bird at a zoo in Pennsylvania that specializes in local wildlife. So vehicle collisions are another in certain areas where they're hunting roadways. Vehicle collisions are certainly a factor. And then there's the whole poisoning issue, the whole rodenticide. And here again is something that we really don't have a whole lot of knowledge on. They've done some work in Canada and Scotland. Scotland, they found that only 35% of carcasses examined had lethal levels of rodenticide. In Canada, on the other hand, it was 65%. In the UK, they've tested a number of birds, both dead and alive, and found that 94% of barn owls in the UK have some levels of anticoagulant in their systems. So that's something that we really should try to find out. There's two strategies in wildlife reproduction. Our strategist and the K strategist. One is early maturity and produce large numbers of offspring. The other is late maturity and few offspring. Barn owls tend to be a little more like the species that are smaller, who reach maturity early and breed rapidly and in large numbers, which is kind of different than some of our other large raptors. We had a chick that fledged from a nest box on the river and traveled 10 miles south and was intercepted by an older male that fall, and she bred the following spring. She was only 9 months old, and she laid clutch eggs and raised a brood. So they mature early in life, and because of their high reproductive rate, they just don't live very long. So the average lifespan is very similar to maybe some of our smaller owls like saw-whets, where it's only about 4 or 5 years. The record longevity record in U.S. is 15 years in the wild, captivity about 28 years. So let's talk a little bit about barn owl, the Patuxent Project, Calvert, Anne Arundel, St. Mary's, and now St. Mary's and Prince George's counties. We have 3 main target areas. The number one is from Jug Bay to Benedict. That's the central region. Then Benedict down to the Patuxent Naval Air Station, and then the northern section from Jug Bay to Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. We want to gain a better understanding of the ecology of barn owls in the Patuxent River corridor through their, learn about their reproduction, their mortality, habitat use, range, natal dispersal, seasonal movements, all the things that I've kind of illustrated that we need to learn throughout the presentation. We will do this through nest box monitoring, banding, and some radio tracking are some of the goals of the project. The Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, which you're probably all very familiar with, is set up to create partnerships to help address priority actions for species of greatest need in Maryland. So 2 of those, the barn owl and the American kestrel, fall into a group of raptors that hunt grasslands and open areas. So the Farmland Raptor program was established. We're trying to obtain a baseline for statewide abundance. How many barn owls are there in the state, and where are they located? Identify those critical habitats, their foraging areas, their nesting sites. Ensure adequate and consistent monitoring of the population, and to broaden citizen participation, and become a principal gateway for information, how information is stored and shared on a state level. And we're doing a lot of that through the Nest Story project. So barn owls are not just another pretty face. They reside in those secluded places in our landscape that are rarely intruded by humans. They're sensitive beings, and they can be easily disturbed from their roost sites and their nest sites. They can abandon them easily with too much disturbance. It's our responsibility to protect these sacred places and ensure that they remain secluded for our sensitive wildlife. So with that, I'd like to thank the following who have helped in this project over the years and still currently help. and hopefully we'll have some time for questions, Chris.
Yeah, I think we can take a few questions. Boy, did I learn a lot during that talk. That was excellent, Andy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you could stop
Unshare.
your screen share, and then we can
Nope.
get, and I'll put this on gallery view. Looking in the chat, nobody had put anything in chat. So I'll open it up. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask Andy? Kathy Geary, you had your hand raised?
No, I actually was clapping because it was so good.
Oh, okay. Okay, very
Thank
good.
you, Kathy.
This is Davy. I have a minor question. I just noticed on the photo of the fledglings,
Yes.
where it didn't have the fur over the bill. It looked like it almost had a tattoo, like a spiral marking on the bill.
That was a watermark from a photographer.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry.
it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Are they migratory?
Well, that's the see, Pete. These are all good questions. In the West, in areas like Idaho, for example, where the winters are really bad, they are migratory. They will fly south for the winter and then can return to their nesting grounds there. There's some thought that maybe the western birds west of the Rocky Mountains might even be a different subspecies than birds east of the Rocky Mountains. They're finding that there's really no interaction between the two populations. They don't cross over the Rockies. So there's another whole host of work that needs to be done, for in terms of the taxonomy of these birds. But our birds are non-migratory. No, they do not. What they do is they disperse from their nest site and recolonize new areas. We have had band recoveries from New Jersey, from the Eastern Shore, birds coming into the Patuxent River from those localities, and we've had some of our birds recovered over on the Eastern Shore as well. So, but we have such a small, limited sample size that we really, it's really not statistically valid data. So that's where putting transmitters on these chicks and on the adults is going to provide key information about where they go and how far they go in search for food and for new territories. So
It said they were sensitive to cold. So I was wondering how they do in the winter.
That well, and see, winter takes its toll. As we saw in 1997, that if we have a bad winter, we'll have a poor nesting season following. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year. We had a number of weeks in the 20s where the temperature didn't get above 25 degrees this winter. So we'll see how they fared. So
I had a question in the chat from Dawn that how does the female maintain hydration if she doesn't leave the nest for several weeks?
she gets water from the food from the mice. Mm-hmm.
And I would add a follow-up question. It seemed like it could be up to 8 weeks.
Yes.
That she's in that box. So
yes.
Isn't there any kind of atrophy that starts to occur with flight muscles?
Flight muscles. That's a good question. Now, I mean, she will come out, for an hour or something like that, and fly around or whatever. But you got to think also she's molting her flight feathers, and so she's not she's not equipped to fly very very well, and but she does come out on occasion. It's not like she's in the pumpkin for good. So.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Not like us going through the pandemic.
Pandemic, right?
Well, Andy, you were discussing one day that you were involved in setting up some new protocols to try to understand some more of the nuances between like the Western and Eastern birds, or maybe our birds and European birds.
Right. So, excuse me, taxonomy studies are based around a number of different factors. One is genetics, obviously. One factor, especially with owls, vocalizations, the analysis of vocalizations is used to separate species, and morphology, size and shape of the birds, and geographical distribution. Those are four main categories that are typically used to determine whether a species is separate from, deserving of being separated. So there's some efforts going on right now that where some of this data is being collected, and one of the projects I'm working on is some of the morphology studies of these adult birds. So we're trying to gather that data as well. Yep. So looks like Jeff, you have a question.
Yes. Actually, two. One's local and one's relates to the beginning of your talk.
Okay.
Looked like all of North America was one of the five, believed to be one of the five barn owl types, but then
Yes.
it looked like the islands, like the Caribbean and Hawaii or something, I'm not sure I understood your graph,
Right.
have the same other one. And how is it that those two places have the same very, subspecies? That's bizarre, right?
I agree 100%. This is something that really, this is what we need to do. We need to find out whether these birds are isolated, whether they are genetically different, whether they have physical differences. So the map of the map of the Western Hemisphere, what you were talking about, has Tyto fricata, the American barn owl, found in all of North America, down through Central America, and in all of South America. Now, how can that be? How can the same species in South America be the same as what's in North America? These birds are not exchanging genetic material. They're not, so that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. The other species was that Glaucops, that ashy-faced owl, and he's really only found on the island of Hispaniola and nowhere else in the world. So he was easy to separate as a separate species because he was, isolated to just that one location.
I guess the other one was a local quick question about how many times a year you found our barn owls nesting, like more than one clutch per year.
Yeah,
And
thank
maybe
you. Thank you
said
for
I missed
asking that.
it.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because in other parts of the world, especially where there's ample food, they will nest around the clock, now around the calendar. They don't follow nesting seasons. Once one is done, and food is available, they'll go ahead and lay another clutch, and they'll just keep on going all around the calendar year. Here in the Patuxent population, we have only found that one time. Greg found it one time with a September nest. We thought we might have had one last year, but it turned out not to come to fruition. So it's very uncommon, but it has happened. So thank you. That's a great question. I didn't point that out. So
Any other last questions before we wrap it up for the evening?
How about the recording, Chris? When will it be available on YouTube?
It should be available by tomorrow.
Okay, very good.
Fantastic.
It just take me processing, downloading, and uploading, and whatever other loading needs to happen to put it out there. But it should be there by tomorrow.
And that is the
It'd be the Anne Arundel Bird Club YouTube channel. And I will have Deb Wade send out the link to that YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you.
Video when I get it posted up there.
Okay,
well, Andy, thank you so much. This was a fantastic program.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yep. Thanks for having me.
Great job, Andy. Learn as much as I did tonight, and I really
thank you all for sharing your Monday night with me. So.
Yeah, good working with you on the project.
Alrighty, very good.
All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of the week, and get out there and do some birding.
Hot dog. Yep.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.